Is Tamika here?
Yes, here.
Ben's here as well. We have a guest for today's curriculum meeting. Tamika. Subbing in for Danielle. Yeah. All right, so is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so on to item 2A.
All right, so I believe we have one thing on the agenda tonight, and it's just to circle back on the block scheduling recommendation. So I'm just gonna let Jenica and Anna lead that conversation and then chime in as needed.
All right, I'll go ahead and share my screen and walk through a couple things. Give me just one moment. If that wants to work.
Wow, I thought B&G used to have a big crowd. This is the crowd right here.
All right, can you see my screen okay? All right, perfect. Thank you so much. All right, so back in February, we spoke to the board about the potential of moving towards a block schedule at Glen Hills. I want to just kind of go through where that conversation was at. We presented around minutes in our last time and taking a look at instructional minutes. And I want to just present the work that has been done by the scheduling team here at Glen Hills to just get to a point of kind of looking at what a schedule would look like as we ironed it out, what a day in the life of a kid would look like, and also kind of thinking about what some of those instructional practices are and what implementation needs would be to move forward with this successfully. So I just want to say that in our work as a team, we talked a lot about placing our scholars at the center of our work. They're the reason why we're here, right? And obviously changes to schedules mean changes for teachers, right? And we want teachers to be in a good space and feel like they're capable and supported in their work, because we know that that means that our scholars can then be supported in their work. But we also need to take a look at how do we get the results that we need for kids, and what are some of the things that are areas of concern that we need to be focused on, and how we want to try to improve as a district and as a school in particular at Glen Hills. So, whoops, sorry, didn't mean to move forward. So a lot of what we talked about is how do we set aside our wants and desires necessarily as an adult and really put kids at the center. And a lot of our conversation was framed around the ideas around some of our students' social emotional learning needs, some of the needs that we're seeing post-pandemic in order to be able to reach our scholars, some of the needs that are presented within our data, and some of the demands of our curriculum, and how we can get to a place where we're actually able to teach the curriculum as it was intended to be taught. So I just want to walk through sort of some of the things that we wanted to take a look at tonight and make clear to our families and to the curriculum committee. So the first thing I want to take a look at is classroom sizes. So you can see that when we look at classroom sizes, we see a lot of parity that if we were to implement a block schedule, our class sizes would mostly remain the same. There is a slight jump in fourth grade because we would be moving from a 5 to 4 section, which would be typical any year moving to Glen Hills. And we have one class at Parkway right now that is a little bit larger than the rest. So this would just be kind of an anomaly that would follow that class year, so that we would have a little bit more of a bubble there. As we take a look at the numbers, you see we maintain the same for grades 5 and 6. There would be no change to any of the learning environment. In grade 7, we would bump up just a little bit from 18 to 22, but we still are at a relatively small class size. The area that you see the largest dip in class size would be the way that we would configure the schedule for our 8th grade. Some of our noticings that we're having this year is our 7th grade students coming back from the pandemic, and the years they've lost as being middle schoolers have been hard, and we want to make sure that we can support them in their social endeavors as well as being able to support them academically. So kind of looking at a day in the life of a student in grades 4 through 5 here at Glen Hills. We built in a 10-minute morning meeting This is something that we started doing this year after the pandemic to foster some time for students to come in, engage with teachers, engage with peers in ways that set up our day for success. Some of the things that happen in grades 4 and 5 now is, some of our teachers have different fist shakes and handshakes with kids as they come in the door. They do a mood check-in and they look at like, how are you feeling today? And just kind of really getting kids in a space of being able to let go of anything that they're carrying with them from the night before and be able to connect with their classmates, share some laughter, sometimes share some support, talk about how they're feeling sleepy some days, and then really get our students set up for success. After that time, we would start to move into probably a reading or math class during this time. So it could look a little bit differently, but a reading class and reading workshop. We use Readers Writers Workshop from Lucy Calkins and the Teachers College. So the way that Readers Writers Workshop is set up is students are introduced to either a reading or writing mini lesson. And then they would move into independent work time where they practice the skill that is presented in the mini lesson that is part of the curriculum. Once they move into that independent work time, it's sort of the teacher shows them, provides some examples of how they can do it. They go to practice it themselves. And then the teacher works through the process of conferring with students or pulling in small groups to really work with them to build on the skill that's taught as part of that mini lesson. As the teacher moves through the classroom, that is an opportunity for a teacher to kind of assess like, hey, is this working? Is it not working? And there might be some mid-workshop teaching points. And then teachers would move kids into a reflection and they might share out what they've read about, or they might share a piece of writing that they've produced during that time. When you're looking at those moments of independent work time and conferring with teacher, all of these components of workshop definitely provide time for kids to move, to reconfigure in the classroom so that there is movement built into that workshop model, as well as being able to have special education teachers push in and provide services during that time, during independent work time or doing small group work time for them to be able to pull a group and work with them. So we can get at some of the specially designed instruction or the support that those scholars would need during that time. And the same is true for gifted and talented. In Bridges Mathematics, the lesson is typically launched. So kids would go and have 80 minutes of math. And they would be introduced to a new concept in mathematics for the day, or a review of a concept from the previous day that needs to be reiterated, aligned to the standards in grades 4 and 5. There would be direct teaching around what that looks like for kids. So you might say like, hey, this is what we did yesterday. Now there's some direct teaching on new skills that are part of the standards. And then the use of station skill development. So you would have students be able to move from stations or work within groups, and they would be able to get support from teachers. It would be a time where special education teachers could push into the room too and help support their learners if they need that support as part of their IEPs. Once they've moved to those areas, teachers would then do some sort of assessment to look at whether that learning, that 5th or 4th grade learning objective had been met for that day and how students performed on it. And then students would also have the opportunity to reflect. Then our scholars would move into a 30-minute resource period. And so we wanted to bring back resource period because that was an area that we received a lot of feedback from both our scholars and families that it's needed time. And during that resource period, all world language teachers would be slated to support during that time so we can help make groups smaller. And we would be able to deliver specially designed instruction for our special education students. Our students who are working with Mrs. Morale would have an opportunity to go with Mrs. Morale. We would have our world language teachers available who could help support small groups if we're noticing that teachers are saying like, hey, in math, or we have a student who's struggling with this concept, could you do some reteaching or some homework support? So it really allows us to make those groups a lot smaller and provide the support that students need. As students move through the day, then they would have an opportunity to go to orchestra, band, choir, or general music humanities class. And so they would have an opportunity to go to the music class that they select. And they would get 40 minutes of instruction there, and that would occur every single day. After their music classes, they would go to lunchtime and recess time. And we would have our allied arts teachers as part of their schedule supervising our scholars at lunch, which puts 3 additional adults into the lunchroom to help support our lunchroom supervisors. And it would also put our physical education teachers outside supervising our students, which would really help with the development with our grades 4 and 5 on fair play, handling losses and wins, competition, which are all things that our gym teachers are equipped to help support our scholars with, and that they could use that support with on the playground. After that time, there would be the allied arts and physical education time, which is very similar to the time that we have now. Students would take one trimester of art, tech ed, or a STEAM class in the Genius Lab, and that would happen every other day. And the day they do not have that allied arts class, they would have their physical education class every other day. And that is how our current system is set up. So it's very much the same. After that, on an every other day basis, we would be looking at having science, and science in the instruction in a block would look like an introduction or review of material, some direct explicit teaching around concept or scientific phenomenon, being able to do a lab or activity, and being able to assess and reflect on that. Again, with those components of instruction, you would have the opportunity for kids to get up and there would be movement and time for them to reconfigure themselves. Social studies would likely be structured very similarly, with introduction review, some direct instruction and activity or project work, and then being able to assess and reflect. So that's sort of the typical day for a 4th or 5th grader. Based on the minutes here and the time, there's not a lot of variance as to what their day looks like currently. Looking at our students in grades 6 through 8, you'll see a lot of similarities as we're working together.
Can I ask you a question before you go to 6 through 8?
Yeah.
So you just said that there is really no difference. What is the difference? I guess I want to know, what is the difference between what is now and what and I want to break it down to not just, I want to see with 4th, 5th grade and 6th through 8th grade, how it's broken down, because I think it's going to be a little bit different.
It is.
So for 4th and 5th grade, it doesn't
the only
seem
thing
like it's that much change.
It's not. It's the only thing that changes is the time, and I do a time comparison after I'm done with these slides. A direct side-by-side time comparison about how minutes are reconfigured during the day.
So do they get science and social studies every day this year?
No.
No. Okay.
Not in 4th and 5th grade.
Okay. So basically it's just where they're going, where they're clumped into, not necessarily what they're doing, because for 4th and 5th, it doesn't seem like it changes all that much.
No.
Okay. All right. Onward. That's what my question is. Ask Ben. Sorry, Ben.
Okay.
Ben.
So when we look at grades 6 through 8, we implemented morning meeting. It's something our teachers felt very strongly about retaining for next year to get the day off to a good start. Obviously 6 through 8 morning meeting looks a little different than handshakes, high fives, and mood charts, although they do look at some mood charts in some different ways with them. However, I do want to make sure that we're clear that is a time where we can bring in current events. So like our 7th graders look at some CNN news, they talk about current events, they talk about things that are going on in the world around them. As their world starts to become a little bit bigger, they're thinking about and worrying about other things. So it's time for them to kind of greet kids, get them off to a good start, maybe talk about things that are concerning them, do a check-in with the class. So that would be maintained going forward into next year. After that time, we would move into a 20-minute resource time. Again, wanting to build back some of that time. And in order to make this time impactful, is we would look at having all of our academic teachers, grades 6 through 8, would be on board to help support students during this time, as well as all of our allied arts teachers, music teachers, PE teachers, world language teachers, as well as our specialists. So you have a lot of support during that time. It is a time when those students in special education would have the opportunity to meet with their caseload managers. It is a time when we would have students who maybe need support in some of their world language classes could be able to get that support. And we would really look at trying to build a little bit tighter schedule this year, with the goal of hoping in subsequent years where we can flex kids a little bit and offer more opportunities. But again, GT interventions, specially designed instruction, time to do some reteaching of skills for those kids that are struggling in math or ELA or science or social studies, And then also being able to provide time for music lessons where it's not, excuse me, interfering with academics. After that 20-minute time, students would move into one of their core academic classes. And so we would be looking at having 80 minutes of readers, writers workshop, which again, the readers, writers workshop for Lucy Calkin, the model stays the same. So again, you would have the introduction of a mini lesson, very direct teaching around standards, time for students to work, time for teachers to confer with students and to meet with them in small groups to help support their writing, help them edit their papers, and then also do some mid-workshop teaching, reflection, and time for students to share the bodies of work that they create or share about what they're reading in their classes, in their groups. Illustrative Mathematics is the curriculum we use there. So we would be moving into an 80-minute block of mathematics. Again, looking at this idea that you would look at what was yesterday's learning, maybe do some review of the homework, move into that very direct teaching around new skills that are aligned with the algebra standards, are aligned with 8th grade, 7th grade, or 6th grade math standards, or the accelerated standards that we use in the accelerated classes. Some station skill development around the teaching around those standards. So, there could be different problems that students are moving to, and they would have the opportunity to work in groups or independently within those things to complete that work. Time to assess them, and then time to reflect on the learning and maybe, concepts that might need to be revisited as part of that review the following day. As students move through their day, they too would have 40 minutes of orchestra, band, choir, or general music and humanities. So they would have those selections available to them during that time. They would have 20 minutes for lunch. Again, I will say in this case, and I apologize because my screen is incorrect, our older students will have their classroom teachers will be assigned to be with them during lunch and recess. So you'll have, the addition of 4 to 5 adults in the lunchroom and at the recess period to help support supervision of those students during that time, which will help with behaviors and ensuring that students are conducting themselves in ways that are school appropriate. They will also have, again, 1 trimester of art, tech ed, STEAM, and the Genius Lab every other day. And then 1 trimester of physical education, or excuse me, a full year of physical education every day. So for each trimester. So nothing changes in their allied arts block. It's very much the same as it was this year and the subsequent years prior. They would have science every other day and social studies every other day for 80 minutes. And again, would be working through this idea of introducing materials, having opportunities for labs or projects, being able to assess and reflect on the work. Having that time also allows for, for example, Ms. Clark does a lot of work outside. It allows for teachers to be able to take kids outside, do some lab work, get in deep to the learning and have the time to do that. So students would be on an A-day, B-day schedule for social studies and science in there. So very similar to their schedule now. Again, this is not about changing our curriculum. It is about being able to teach our curriculum to the way that it's intended to be taught with more fidelity. And it also is primarily about the reconfiguration of minutes to help build back in a resource period for students. So looking at a side-by-side comparison, we can take a look at what the differences are in terms of time configuration. As you can see, this column to the far right indicates our current minutes of instruction. So right now we're at 9,000 minutes across the board, grades 4 through 8 in both math and ELA. With the shift in the schedule, we would bump up math to be 14,400 and 14,400 in ELA at grades 6 through 8. 4 through 8 math would be also at that area. And in grades 4 through 5, we would be at 19,800 minutes of ELA. The additional time of ELA at grades 4 and 5 is congruent with an elementary model, which puts primary on building up some of those foundational skills in reading that are still required at the earlier grades before they move into middle school and getting them set up for that strong foundation. Social studies and science, we will be increasing time for our 4th and 5th graders, which I would argue builds content knowledge, which is helpful in both their reading and their setup. It does slightly reduce our time, grades 6 through 8, but it does provide for longer blocks of time where students can get at more of those labs and exponential learning that could happen there. Music, right now we're at 9,000. Again, we would drop to this 7,200 just based on the fact that the class length is a little bit shorter. I did go back and do a review of schedules. We've had music in an alternating fashion from anywhere from 30 minutes to 45 minutes to 50 minutes this last year. So it's kind of comparable. It sort of sits somewhere in the middle between where those classes have been. Again, that is true for world language. We would see a slight dip in world language due to the 40-minute period versus the 50-minute period. And then we would also see that PE and allied arts would be a slight dip because we're basically stealing a little bit of time to try to build in that resource period. But we go from 0 to 3,600 minutes of resource time in 6th through 8th grade, which is something we don't have right now. And it would provide us with resource time grades 4 through 5. And then our morning meeting time would be on par with what we've done this school year. Any questions about minutes?
Yeah, how do kids sign up for resource?
What do you mean?
Or how is it run? Do teachers get assigned kids or?
Right now, we don't have a resource block here. So if we were going to introduce a resource block, we would look at doing an assignment. So students would be assigned to a teacher for support, and it probably be on a rotational schedule so that students who are in need of support could get like math support 2 days a week, ELA support, or science support 1 day a week. So we could do a rotational schedule, but we have to program kids to be in an assigned space because we have to be accountable for attendance. I think one of the things that I mentioned before, Mr. Wynn, was looking at the idea that in subsequent years, if we could build in more flexibility around that, we could do that. But right now we want to make sure that we have it a little bit tighter so that we can have this be a successful time. So you have all of these teachers on deck who can help support, and we know which kids need to go to music lessons. There's an email list generated out. So we would probably start the year with some tight assignments of where kids are supposed to be and which adult they report to. And then as the year goes on, we start to know where kids' needs are, so we can start to reprogram them and reconfigure them and have that be a little bit more fluid. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
Just a quick question. For the kids who take music is how many times a week? Like if they're doing, not in music, I mean like, what is being done in the resource? That's when they play music, correct? Or they do their lessons?
So students usually, depending on the lesson schedule. So this year, for example, we had students who go down depending on their lesson needs. So within the teacher schedule, there are other times the teachers can pull kids. So we've always had kids that might like dip out of an academic class to go down for music lessons. Like that's always happened, right? So what the benefit of the resource time would be if we have a student, for example, that like is in a space where their grades are demonstrating they're strong in math and ELA and they want to do their lesson during that time so it doesn't interfere, we could schedule it during that time. But it's in addition to the music class, which would be happening every day.
Right, but what I'm asking is, and I'm always going to go to the opposite, what about that kid who needs help and has a lesson in resource time?
Then what we would do is they typically don't have our lesson every single day, right? So you would say like, okay, so if you have a student who needs help in math, we would say, okay, we'll schedule the lesson for Monday, but then the rest of the week you can get support with math so that you can get caught up. And then like maybe the next week, if they need help in ELA, there would be the opportunity then to kind of work around that. Does that make sense? So your lessons don't typically happen every single day of the week, right? And so if they're on a rotating basis that they bring scholars down to do some of those lessons. So it's not an everyday thing, just like we wouldn't pull them out of an academic class every day. So they might miss a 20-minute resource period for support in order to go to a lesson so that they can continue their love of music and feel like they're growing as musicians, because that may be their driving force for being here at school, but then they would still have the opportunity to get the support to help build their skill in mathematics.
Well, that's what I just wanted to understand, that there's some compromise with the love of music and also getting what they need to get the job done, because their sole purpose, I don't care what they say, they're supposed to be students, they're supposed to be learning. So I want to make sure that is at the forefront, and then helping them achieve their other goals by playing music or doing whatever is secondary, but also incorporated it all into it.
Yeah.
You have to be wraparound services, I guess that's what I'm looking for.
Yeah. And I think too, like having the number of adults that are available during that time too, like, and you know, kids have a whole host of different needs. Like we may have kids that could use like meditation time down in the gym with Miss Timmerman, or, you know, like some yoga time or something like twice a week to just help with getting to their center. Like, but because we have all those adults in like on deck to help support that, we can provide some of the things that we're unable to do now if we are like, if we're all together. And that was really important to our staff when we were talking, is like, we know kids need a lot of different things, right? And we are trying to be all things to all children as much as we possibly can. But this, you know, whether, and it's only 20 minutes of the day, but it provides something that we're not doing right now.
So I do have one other small question, and I'm sorry, Ben, I'm taking up all the question times, but now how this, I keep hearing you say things like we have all the staff to help the kids, but is this taken away from teachers' prep time as well? Because that seems to be an issue too. And I'm sorry if I'm asking these in not the right order, but I just want to make sure that now we have all these teachers who are going to help these kids, but Ben is going to look at me and say, what about the kids? I mean, the teachers in their prep time, you know, because that's what I learned from him.
Right. And to go back to that, like I will also say, like, not having adults that feel accomplished and good in their work is not good for kids any day of the week. And I would 100% agree with that. So let's take a look at, I'll just go through some of the overview highlights of this, and then I'm going to talk specifically about teachers because they're the next part of this, because we need to also tend to their needs and think about what this change means for them as well.
I have a quick.
Yeah.
So what would the transition, so morning meetings are 10 minutes, resources 20 minutes.
Yep.
What does that transition look like?
We have 2-minute transitions built in where there needs to be transitions, if that makes sense. So like where there's blocked time, like there are some consistent blocks because, you know, Ben, as you know, we have different levels of math here. And so we have to have chunks of time in which everyone in the building is teaching math to honor those accelerated classes. And so in the schedule where those are, we're not building the transition in between the 40-minute timeframes. But all of the other ones are built in with a 2-minute transition, which is where we're at right now. And you know that we're in our pods. Kids are not moving very far unless they're going all the way downstairs. And even then they can do that in 2 minutes. Like we're not seeing there's much tardiness happening around some of those things. So we would build in the transitions anytime there was transitions that needed to occur. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so the kids come into school for 10 minutes, they're in the morning meeting, then they transition right to resource.
Yep, and for many kids, they'll probably end up being up in their, they'll end up being in one of their core classes that they're already in for morning meeting. There'll just be some kids that would transfer and transition. Does that make sense? Because we would try to set that up where we have certain groups that would move out. And so you would still have several kids that would not be moving at all during that time. We would just have some kids moving at that time.
Yeah. Well, I'll just say 20 minutes does seem kind of short for like a resource. So
I know the issue.
Yeah. Could you consider not doing a morning meeting and just doing 30 minutes of resource?
So that was that was a really strong pushback from the staff here who worked with us on the schedule. And I will tell you, my teachers would They stopped, held the phone, said, like the schedule in many ways, but you need to fix this because we need morning meeting and we can't do this without morning meeting. So yes, it's possible to remove morning meeting to get at 30 minutes, but the feeling of all of the staff that was present in the room is we need that time with kids in the morning. And we need to set them up for success. So I want to honor that request from the staff here too. And so that was where the compromise. And I went in and looked at some of Hattie's work, and the return on investment in terms of intervention for resource time is not as great as it is in grades 4 and 5, right? Which is why the extended time is there in 4 and 5. Because I was able to move that around a little bit differently in their schedule because they don't have world language.
Okay.
So that's kind of the reason why that we looked at it that way. But I hear what you're saying. Yeah.
She told you, did she?
All right. So basically some of our overview, every scholar would start their day in a morning meeting for a strong start. That was super important, as I just mentioned. Resource period is added back into the schedule for academic enrichment and support. We have additional staff slated to support the resource period, and staffing needed to reduce group sizes for greater impact. Duty time for Allied Arts, PE, World Language, and Music teacher creates the following opportunities. Our PE teachers can support our kids in grades 4 and 5 at recess. Our Allied Arts, PE, and World Language teachers would have a duty to collaborate with student services and administration to support academic and SEL coaching and student incentives. We have many students who are on like a daily report, and we do a lot of goal setting with them, and we meet with them in the morning and we check in with them. This expands my adults to help do that work with kids who really need it. Working with student services and administration, we can look at kids who are maybe struggling academically, so we can have adults go and check in with them during their duty period to say like, hey, like let's work on bringing that grade up. I mean, we know how important that kind of support is, so we would be able to provide that, and I'll show why that's possible when I look at teacher minutes in the next slides. A fourth option in the music rotation for grades 6 through 8 for those who are not interested in performance music. And then also STEAM opportunities for scholars during the Allied Arts rotation in our Genius Lab, which we finally have most of our furniture for, and we'll be looking at getting equipment in there. So it's an exciting learning opportunity for our scholars. So teacher minutes overview. So currently right now, our teachers are getting 100 minutes daily for prep, which I will say exceeds any district I've ever worked in. I know it exceeds what teachers get at Parkway. They're very fortunate to have that time. And they get a 30-minute lunch and they have a 20-minute duty. There would be a slight shift in that. So we would have, teachers would have 80 minutes of prep because we're looking at that 80 split, right? They would have a 40-minute lunch. And those teachers that have a 30-minute lunch the compromise would be that they would only have a 10-minute duty versus having a 40-minute duty. Okay. So really we're looking at a difference of 10 minutes if you do the math for teachers.
So are you counting? So Glen Hills ends at what time?
Glen Hills ends at 3:45. Our buses dismiss at 3:55.
Okay.
Yep.
So right now they're getting 100 minutes throughout the day.
But you bet.
Okay. And
So they have,
so isn't one of the big things for them that they're not getting enough prep time?
yes,
Okay.
I've heard that. So they get 2 preps a day, and we have 50-minute blocks. So they have 2 50-minute preps a day. Going into next year, they would have 2 40-minute preps. So equating 80 minutes, which is like, I've worked in a few districts, and typically teachers only get 1 prep a day. So they get half of that.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. And
Yes.
then also you said that before that teachers are supervising lunch and recess.
Mhm.
So where do they get their 30-minute lunch then?
Their 30-minute lunch comes in the schedule because of the way that the specials run. So basically you have students going out for world language. You have students going out for the Allied Arts and PE block, and you have students going out for the music block, right? So if you're thinking about that, Ben, you've got those 3 blocks, right? So those are 3 40-minute blocks. So if they get two of them for prep, they have 1 for lunch. And so then the other one, the 4th one that comes in, they're actually supervising.
Why not hire people to supervise lunch instead of having to do it?
Because it has been my experience in working here and in another 4-8 building that you have better results when you have people who know kids, know expectations of the school, are consistently here. We have 2 lunchroom supervisors this year. That's it. And that's all I could hire because that's all I could get in the door. So I need more supervision at lunchtime. I'm pulling people from other places. So having adults who know kids, know them well, no expectations of the school, being the people who are there supervising them could really help support our scholars and help keep concerns around behavior in a different place.
Are they going to be compensated for this?
It would be part of their teacher workday because they're already getting their 80 minutes of prep and their lunch, which is consistent. So it's not, it would not be a paid duty. It would be part of their teacher workday.
Well, okay.
And because otherwise they would be in a duty-free period, right?
Yeah, I don't think teachers should have to supervise lunch without being compensated.
Okay. And I would say right now we have a couple of teachers who supervise lunch and all of our teachers supervise recess. And the incidents at recess are pretty few and far between because we have the teachers who know them best outside with them, and it helps.
And
Okay.
Ben, I would just argue that when we were doing contracts, I put it into their thing as part of their contract. I already compensated them for that. So they're getting paid. It's like, I don't understand that concept. It's just like if I'm at work and I had to take the trash out because my trash was full, that I should get some extra dollars because I took the trash out and now I'm doing what the custodial people were doing, or if I have to, clean up a mess. Come on, Ben. You do real good with that, but
I mean, it's okay that we disagree. I just
Yeah.
have an opinion on that.
That's
I
okay.
know I just wanted to say that I disagree, but I still love Finland.
So teachers in grades 6 through 7 would be moving to teach 2 subjects, forming 2 families. So you'd be kind of reducing the footprint of the families of 6th graders. They would still be combined with each other at recess lunch, but they would have a little bit more of a tight-knit community. And by doing that, you're reducing grading responsibilities. So it's kind of a wash in terms of I'm taking on a prep, but I also am getting fewer student papers and fewer student work to grade. Our world language teachers will teach grades 6 through 8, which means they teach fewer sections, and it reduces their grading responsibility, which is part of what frees them up to help support in those other areas, because they are not, like, if you're looking at an 11-period day, they're only filling some of those periods, which means they have other time within their day to be supporting students. We have I would be asking for 1 math and 1 ELA teacher to be added to 8th grade to create that 6-person team to bring down the class sizes and to reduce the grading responsibilities in math and ELA. And then in science and social studies, the 8th grade teachers will see all students every other day, which reduces the amount of prepping they have to do, but it does maintain their grading responsibilities. So there's some give and take in terms of teacher responsibilities that are there, right? And so the idea is to try to create as much parity in what teachers are expected to do as we possibly can, because I do think that that is also an important part of our work to make sure that that's balanced. Our music, allied arts, and PE teachers will maintain the same configuration and grading responsibilities because out of those 11 periods of the day, they're only teaching 5, right? Because you split that up. they have some open times, which is why they're then assigned to help support at recess, or they're assigned to help support with student services, or they're assigned to help support in the lunchroom. Okay. So thinking around instruction in a block, we know that we need planning to make this successful, and we would want to look at a pacing guide for classes for a 9-week cycle, because that's how long our trimesters are. That includes weekly and daily planning. That we have a variety of effective instructional strategies. Some of the strategies that were mentioned in the slide before are things that the staff here has worked through and taken a look at some different models. The vision, or the skill to design and maintain a classroom that allows for flexibility and creativity. Making sure that we have classroom management and the desire and the skill to be an effective classroom manager, and openness to be in a space where we share the ownership of teaching and learning with our scholars. So if we take a look at some of the options in terms of Readers Writers Workshop, our curriculum is very much supportive of a workshop model that has the following components as part of the instructional block. All of these different components, as mentioned before, have the ability for students to not be locked into a seat being talked to or read at, or sitting there writing for 80 minutes. It means that there is going to be movement in the classroom. There are different components of that workshop in which students will be engaged in. Our team here looked at the classic block schedule. Again, you see the practice of really breaking up time throughout this. So you would have, 10 minutes of engaging them in review. You might have 15 to 20 minutes of direct explicit instruction where you're teaching the skill and you delivering the lesson. That might look like a lecture. It could be a demonstration. It could be a video of something, having students read through some kind of text. About 30 minutes of student application, and that's where we'd start to see like group work or station work or something like that happening. And then 15 to 20 minutes of assessment to really understand, are kids secure in what I taught today, and what do they need to going forward? And then a 10-minute reflection or some kind of wrap up. And I feel like this is a hugely misplaced step when we don't have time, but having kids reflect on, what did I do well today as a learner? How could I have done better as a learner? What concepts were a stick for me? Like what parts were moving smooth for me, so that teachers have that feedback so they can help support kids in the classroom. Our math teachers also wanted to take a look at the station rotation, because they felt like that would be an interesting way for them to help get at like different stages of problem solving and have that work with the way the curriculum is designed. Again, you see the movement and you see the variation within the block. The other area our science and social studies teachers looked at was the idea of the lab or performance model, in which you do an introduction and kids are engaged in something that's hands-on. So I mentioned like a science teacher going outside. So if they're going outside and examining a phenomenon and they're doing an experiment outside, there's no need to break it up because we're engaged in something that's already active. The performance would be that you would have those end of unit displays. So maybe in social studies, you do a great like museum exhibit and people are displaying the work that they've done and the research that they've conducted. So that kind of takes us back to the idea of what does it take for this to be implemented? The sort of next phases of this that I would see is really surveying staff regarding some of their subject area preferences. Most of our staff are teaching in areas they're comfortable with, but we want to think about how we configure the additional subjects for them in a way that they feel like they can grow or have support in. Making sure that we're scheduling and getting caseload distribution to support our scholars with IEPs in a good space based on the way the schedule will run. Refining the identified frameworks and conducting some school visits to watch some of those things in action before the end of the school year. They're really developing with teachers and maybe doing some paid work over the summer in which we look at a common planning tool. So that 9-week planning tool that includes the weekly and daily components. And in that planning tool, really making sure we're being cognizant of how do we incorporate support for gifted and talented students, English language learners, and our special education students so they're successful in the classroom. incorporating classroom management. So really thinking about like, where can things kind of come undone in the classroom? How are we structuring routines? How do we think about how students will respond to that? What students, you may come into class and Anna's in your class and she has a hard time getting started and you know that, how are you going to plan in advance for that to maybe assign her a job so that she's doing what she needs to be doing so that you can get the rest of the class going and she can have a successful start. Looking at incorporating culturally responsible content and practices. We have to make sure that we're making the learning that we're doing here relevant to our students by connecting it to their lives. And we have a responsibility to make that forefronted in our work and also to incorporate some social emotional learning competencies into the class. How did you manage your time today? What skills did you use when working with a group today? Were you able to use kind words when you were speaking? Did you talk as much as you listened? So really kind of enforcing some of those competencies. Developing expectation and norms for co-planning and co-serving scholars with collaboratively developed look-fors with observation, peer feedback, coaching, and the administrative evaluation process. So as a team, right, our specialists, our teachers, our administrators in this building, Mr. Williams and myself need to be with our people to be able to say, okay, how can we collaboratively think if this is done well and what it looks like, what are our look-fors so that we're all on the same page with that work. We will need time to plan and reflect and practice results together because we can't get better at the work unless we're doing it, meeting, having opportunities to talk about where our struggles, where our pain points, where our growth areas, what is going well, what are we seeing as a result of our work in student learning. Also, our student services and allied arts, PE, and world language would need to work together to plan some of those morning meetings. So we're touching on some important topics that need to come out of that. Working on connecting some of the work we're doing with parent communications around SEL strategies for home, and then working together to coach and monitor the academics and SEL for identified scholars. And then really time for staff collaboration to support that resource time with interventions, gifted and talented enrichment, and specially designed instruction. So having the time when all of those parties are together. So our teachers have common preps throughout the day on grade level teams and with subject areas, but we don't necessarily have the time to collaborate as a whole. So we are going to need that time to really make that resource period be as productive as it can be. All right. That's what I got for you.
I have 4 questions. You answered one of them.
Okay.
So I'm going back to what Ben said in the sense of that 10 minutes and then that 20, and then it goes into, now, I don't know, I'm gonna say this out loud, and so please don't jump on me, but I don't know any kid that settles down exactly in the amount of time. Like usually it takes 3 to 5 minutes to settle a class down. So there goes, 3 to 5 minutes of that 10-minute time. And then and I understand that they might have 10 minutes of meeting or talking, but then they're gonna move again. Most of them, or some of them may move again for resources, because some of them will stay where they are, correct? If I'm understanding, and some will move. But even if a small majority of people move, that's still that restless, get back to, what is that? Slap, clap, hand, finger, hand, so you get the attention of the kids again.
Yeah.
So that is one thing I'm concerned about, because if we are not, I like the fact that we have the 80 minutes, and I really do like that segment of it, because they're there and they're getting instruction, constantly. It's the little things that we're trying to put in all into one. So that's my first comment. I'll tell you all my comments and then you can just speak. Secondly, are we, and I just learned about the way we do our social emotional learning curriculum. And are we putting those back onto the teachers to kind of implement this within their classrooms? Or are we still going to be pulling kids out so the counselors can teach this? Because that is one thing that I'm not liking at all. And I even shed a couple tears off of that because I felt like our kids are so in need of some guidance and some like counselor love, that having our counselors actually teach or do guidance counseling stuff. And I know some of this is going to change next year. So, but I want to know how that will kind of work. And my last question is, when you say staff developed, is this administrative staff developed, this concept, or were the teachers involved in this whole process as well? Because sometimes it's a discussion with just, like administrators, and then later you go to teachers and after you figure out, or was this actually talked with the teachers and the staff throughout this whole process to decide to go through Black? So those are my three, and you can answer them in any way you want to.
To your first point, that 20 minutes is going to be tight, and there's a 2-minute transition built in. So if we're on a great day, we'll get kids settled within 3, and we'll only lose a minute or 2 of time, right? But I agree with you, it's tight. And, it is tacking, having that morning meeting tacks a little time onto the day. And so it is an increase because my staff felt it was really important. I guess the concern I have is, you looked at the time configuration, and it was, how do we, in a finite amount of time, how do we allocate time to get what we need, right? And so, I
didn't say I know the answer, and I'm not saying the answer. I'm just saying that that's a question that sometimes a answer doesn't have a question doesn't have an answer, but at least it is looked at. And when somebody asks you this question again, you can say, look, this is what we looked at, this is what we can do. So you can explain it fully and say, we looked at that. But if I didn't ask the question, and eventually somebody would say, well, why didn't you look at this? And we didn't, and I didn't look at it that way. So,
and we looked at, and I will say the team looked at a couple different models, and we looked at models where we did all kinds of flipping around of days and things like that. And the consensus of the team when I was upstairs with earlier this week was, please don't go with a more complicated schedule so we can gain that time. And no matter how we work it, if we're going to do 10 minutes of the SEL morning meeting time, I can't get at 30 without extending our school day past 4 o'clock, right? I'm stuck with the time frame to try to give us what we need. And so it's a constraint that I can't work around, right? And there could be things that we look at, maybe we do more of a longer, heavier SEL at the beginning of the week, and we gain that full 30 minutes midweek and then wrap up at the end of the week. There are different ways that we could look at playing with that. And I think the staff would be open to that. But I agree with you. It's a tight spot, and it's, I guess for lack of better terms, kind of the best case scenario that the team felt like it could come up with, right?
What you just said, it said one of the variations would be Monday, Wednesday, Friday, they did the 10-minute thing. And then maybe Tuesday, Thursday, they went on a full 30-minute. Okay. So there is some options, or you're looking at something that could pass. Okay.
Yeah. So for example, maybe you want to teach a tighter SEL lesson on Monday. So you take more time out of that resource period to do some focus and have, the counselors prepare some of that stuff so that it can be taught there. But then you would then move into the resource and just kind of visit in classes throughout the day. There are different ways to try to work to embed it. But I do think those are some deeper conversations at the school level that we need to have about what is going to be most impactful for kids, right? So to your next question, I'm trying to remember them all. To your next question was, will SEL be, so every other week in Glen Hills, our students go 1 day a week to either library or SEL. So every other week they're back and forth, right? And the goal, the thinking behind that for the school year was to try to help to give more SEL services to kids, but we're finding that it's not successful, right? So we tried something and it didn't work, and that happens, right? And so where I'm at with it right now is really looking forward to, I've advocated to Ms. Weiss for the idea of hiring an additional counselor next year. I don't know where the board will land on that, but just going to put that plug in. But I would also just like to add that typically counseling services, counselors will like push in on a rotational schedule to grade levels to help support. So that could actually happen during the ELA time, which then allows the counselors much more flexibility to be responsive to kids' needs throughout the school day. Does that make sense? Okay, all right. So that's kind of where I would envision that going next year. And then in addition to that, some of the library work around research and things like that are also things that, you know, typically English language arts class would go to the library and learn how to do research. So again, it could be more embedded versus a separate space and separate time. So it's not disjointed. And then your other question about a team, are you specifically talking about expectations and norms that are on this slide, or are you talking about the whole process?
The beginning process from beginning until you got to the implementation where it says survey staff regarding. So anything before that, was
Yep.
this just administrative input, finding out that we're gonna figure out what we're gonna do and then we're gonna tell the teachers what to do? Almost like what the board does where we figure out and we tell you guys what to do. I wonder if it was top heavy down or if it was actually collaborative. Because a lot of this is on the backs of the teachers.
Yep.
A lot of this work is going to be on the backs of the teachers and just
Mhm.
like the board puts stuff in and we don't know how it actually works when you get down to doing it.
Yep.
Sometimes I want to make sure administrators, even though you guys were teachers, sometimes you're far removed and you forget sometimes. So we want to
Absolutely.
make sure that we're doing this as well. It's just, and I will never, this is the most questions I've ever asked of any committee, because this is my first time ever being on any committee that was not either policy or B&G. So this is fascinating for me. So I apologize for asking so much and speaking, but
That's okay. They're good. They're really good questions. So I would say that starting last year, we started looking at like, you know, this is like what's happening with our achievement. How can we make gains? We looked at the fact that it was shared with me that prior to my entry that Dr. Rogers was working on block scheduling and that our partner districts were working through that. So we're kind of looking at some of those components. And when we started to kind of take a look at that, as I was meeting with our literacy specialist, as I was meeting with teachers, I was hearing things about like, you know, from our 4th and 5th grade teachers last school year, even when we returned to school in person, like we don't have the time to teach the Bridges curriculum the way it's supposed to be taught, right? Our ELA teachers are struggling to find the time to build the stamina around reading and writing at the middle grades because they have such a short amount of time with kids in those spaces. So taking all of those things in and spending a lot of time talking as well with our math and literacy specialists at the beginning of the year about like how can we look at figuring this out. So one of the things that we did is, I believe starting in, I'd have to look at my timeline, it was late November, early December, we talked about the fact that we were going to be looking and exploring a block schedule. All of those meetings were posted in my week at a glance that went out to teachers. They were held at a common time in the morning where teachers do not have conflicting meetings going on so that they could be present. I sent email reminders to teachers. So we had a good turnout of people who would come to those meetings, share feedback, their thinking. We looked initially at sort of what are our priorities? So that was where we started. Like if we're thinking about how to make things better and to do good work for kids, what are things that we want to prioritize, right? Then from there, we solicited some feedback from our families. We solicited feedback from our students about how to align some of those priorities and start doing some of the work around that. From there, we took a look at, you know, sort of what are some non-negotiables? What are the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats to this work? So we walked through a SWOT analysis together. After that, we spent time taking a look at different instructional frameworks. We looked at models from other schools in the morning and spent some time doing that. I've had some really robust discussions with teachers and the meetings after the meetings where people would say like, hey, I thought about this more. I don't like this. I want to push on this. I don't think this is good. Like there's been teachers back and forth having that kind of dialogue with each other in those spaces. And, you know, then I finally brought like an iteration of, okay, this is a schedule that we could run. What feedback do you have on that? And they said, we don't like the fact that there's not morning meeting, right? Like we need that time with kids, like we're not going to get where we need to get. So I went back, I revised it, I went back and revised again, brought it to them. We looked at that. I said, okay, here's 3 different models. Out of these 3 different models, where do you think we should lie, right? I've filled in my allied arts PE teachers in my meeting with them. I've brought updates to staff meetings as well. So I feel like it's been as inclusive. If you wanted to be involved in the process, there were many opportunities for you to be involved in the process.
Okay. So I actually do like block scheduling, especially as a math teacher. I do think it's really important to have that time for math, because 50 minutes just doesn't feel like enough. But my main concern here is teacher prep time, because that's going down by 20 minutes. And, we've heard from them that they're not getting enough prep time. So it doesn't make sense to me to cut it. And the easiest place to get some of that prep back is during that lunchtime. So that's my thought on that. And yeah, those are my 2 thoughts.
Hypothetically speaking, only hypothetically speaking, I thought that at some point you guys were going to come back to ask us to talk about that shortened day. What does that look like with this then? Where the teachers will have that prep time, because that is what that is for teachers to have that prep time. What does it look like in a block schedule like this? And will it change the hours if that is implemented? I don't know if that's.
Yep. Yeah. So I would look at, to me, the value of having the early release time would be that there's a lot of heavy lifting to get this going and a lot of collaboration that needs to happen. And it's helpful to have those spaces where all teachers can be involved, like talking about the resource period, the collaboration between student services. So having that time where we can chunk that. If there were an early release day, what would happen with this kind of schedule is you would just abbreviate every period, right? So kids would go, they would walk an entire schedule for the day, but we would abbreviate the period. So they wouldn't be getting that whole block during those Wednesdays. They would be shortened on those days, right? Because we would have to accommodate that time. So basically one day, I think you were looking at an every other week schedule, if I'm right, Mrs. Weiss. If you were looking at that every other week, they would run a shortened schedule where they would have touch points with all of those teachers. Or we might look at kind of like just narrowing the field on that, or maybe cutting out the resource or doing like something special where they stay in one spot for resource because it's shorter, right? Like that would be a day, maybe we do like a special activity in classrooms, some team building or something with students on those days, focus on college or ACP ready, college readiness days, that kind of things. So we could take a look at how to play with that time, but it would just mean running an abbreviated schedule.
Yeah. Then I'm done with all my questions.
Okay. Yeah, no, okay. So I guess we can open it up to the public if they have any questions.
Thank you, Anna.
Yeah, thank you.
Welcome. Welcome.
Can you take
Yep,
step sharing? Yeah, thanks.
There you go. Gotcha.
Okay, so I think Justin is going to be up first, and yeah, Justin first.
Where did he go?
And if you could state your name and address, please.
Oh, there he is.
Yes. Hi, my name is Justin Rodriguez, and my address is 5742 North Sunset Lane. First, I wanted to say that Principal Young, you had a great presentation. I really appreciate all the information and how it was laid out, and being able to see that typical day helped a lot, and it alleviated some concerns that I had. One thing I wanted to suggest, if the presentation is going to the full board, is that there was a helpful slide that broke out the number of minutes by subject area for the different grade levels. One thing I would like to see is the total instructional minutes for each of the different grade levels, just so we can kind of know what that comparison looks like between this current school year and then the 2022-2023 school year. Another thing I like that you had mentioned, Principal Young, is that you had mentioned other activities that could be done during resource time, like yoga. And I think that's a good thing to provide access to other physical activity during some of the resource time potentially, especially since the amount of PE time for students is being reduced. So I think the yoga, and then encouraging any other options that could be added during the resource time for physical activity, actually, I think would be a great thing to offer to some students.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, and then finally, I wanted to say that I appreciate the additional supervision that's being added in the current proposal for the lunchtime, because I think there have been a lot of incidents at the school, and I think the more supervision that we can provide with staff that know the students best, I think that'll help alleviate a lot of issues that occur during that lunchtime. So those are my comments, and thanks again for the presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I think Estrita had her hand up, but she put it down, I think. So then Carrie would be up next.
Hi, everyone. Carrie Zeidoff, 6840 North Glen Shore Drive. I always forget to say that, so glad I remembered. I have a couple questions and then maybe a few comments. So I don't know if maybe it's easier just to answer the questions as I go. One thing I did not notice in the 6-8 kind of schedule was I didn't see world language on there at all. I don't know if I missed it. I don't know if, but I didn't anywhere where world languages.
I apologize if I misstepped. I'll go back and look at it. World language would meet every day for 40 minutes.
Yeah.
Every day for 40 minutes. Okay, yeah, I don't see that on there at all. Okay. Okay. I have so many, I'm just trying to pare it down so I don't overboard and make this last even longer. It's been mentioned several times that families and students were surveyed. When or how was that done? Because I do not, I mean, I answer every survey all the time. I don't know if it was specifically about block scheduling or if it was like lumped in with another schedule or another survey, but I don't recall that. And I'm curious how students were surveyed as well.
Students were surveyed by teachers during their morning meeting time. So we had feedback from all of the scholars during their morning meeting time. So we had, I would say, like a pretty strong return on that. The survey to families was put in the Thursday folder. It was also sent to families via email. I would have to go through my email, but could pull a date for you if you would like that.
That would be great. And then so when the students were surveyed in morning meeting, were the same questions asked? I mean, was it like a scripted, set of questions so that every class, every teacher was asking the same questions? And then how is that feedback like compiled and gone through?
It was done through a Google form and it was compiled through the Google form. And teachers walked kids through how to fill it out and walked through, read the questions, answered any, if they had any like questions, like what does this mean or something like that, they could help support that. And then we accumulated the answers that way.
Okay, and like specifically about like scheduling, or I'm just curious how students would be
It was priorities about what they need. So I can share with you, and this was shared in the last board meeting back in February when I initially did this. Students' top priority in terms of scheduling was physical education, as you can well imagine. And then their next top priority was being able to get the support they need in math and reading. So those were the two top areas that students identified are things that they needed.
Okay, great. Though,
And for families, the top priorities that came out were making sure that we had world language. So I appreciate your question around that, because it's important to clarify that if it wasn't clear. And then the other top priority for parents was academic support in math and reading, and maintaining our allied arts and PE options for students at the middle level.
okay, great. It
Yep.
does look like PE minutes though are decreasing, even though that was a student's #1 concern, and I know that.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, their recess time is a little bit, well, we're tacking about 5 minutes onto recess. I mean, I can tell you that. Again, it's that problem of where do we get minutes, right? Yeah.
And I see the opportunity for the PE teachers to provide more structured play at recess, since they'll be outside. So it's just like recess will be a little bit more beneficial for games and things too.
Okay. And talking about world language with this change in schedule, and I know sometimes with German, and I don't have a huge, understanding of how that all works, but will German still be able to continue as one of the world language? I know.
Yep. We'll be offering, in grade 6, we offer Spanish, and in grade 7 and 8, we'll offer Spanish or German as an option. And so, and we'll have that support from Nicolay to continue that programming as long as we can continue that. But I know it's moving forward for next school year as well.
Okay. I echo Ben's concern about the 20-minute resource. And I mean, by the time you really get kids to where they need to go, that ends up being not a lot of effective time, and I'm concerned about that. I am a strong proponent of morning meetings, but typically when you're really going to do them well, they need to be longer, and they need to be much more guided as far as consistency and cohesiveness on how you're implementing a true morning meeting, not just like a quick check-in kind of thing. That's a little bit harder at a middle school. 4th and 5th grade can probably dive into that a little bit more. But we do go into Ben's concern about prep. There's never enough time in the day for anyone. I do think that admin needs to keep in mind that even though teachers are going to have less prep time with this new proposed schedule, but you're also lengthening lessons. So even though maybe they're not having to prep as many different classes, the time of the class is much longer. So you're still planning 2 days, old days into one. So you still need a lot of prep time, especially when you're thinking about how to keep kids engaged and for longer periods of time. I do appreciate that we're increasing ELA and math minutes. I think that's important, especially to get better in alignment with the other Nicolay feeder schools. We have to keep in mind though, Glen Hills is its own school. So we still have to do what's best for Glen Hills families and students and staff. Even though we're trying to make things similar, other Bayside, for example, has a much stronger emphasis on the arts. All kids have general music and the option to do another music. So that is not something, the music program seems to keep kind of dwindling here at Glen Hills. So I know everyone's doing the best you can, but we just need to make sure we're keeping that in mind. And I'll just end. I have other things, but I can type up some things and send them to the board and admin as well. We know that these past few years have been insane, crazy, but there has not been consistency. So making huge curriculum changes now and scheduling changes seems, I think we should be looking at culture and really solidifying culture within Glen Hills before we're changing curriculum. Staff morale, student morale should be the #1 thing that is being focused on and emphasized on. And I think that is something that really needs to be considered before we're making huge changes to curriculum, is really changing and solidifying a stronger foundation within the culture at Glen Hills. I'll just end with that.
Thank you. I would just a couple of things really appreciate everything that you said. And a couple of things I would just notice, I don't want anyone to think we're trying to be like the other feeders. We're just trying to make sure our kids aren't shortchanged and that they're not getting the same academic access. So it's never ever a thought to think we want to be just like, because we are very unique in some pretty amazing ways, and we don't want that to change. And we all agree with you on culture, and that's very important, but I don't think it has to be separate. And in some ways, I look at the disruption we've had and you think, so this is a really great opportunity to not go back because we've had a disruption. So now let's look at what's best practice, and it's the perfect time to make a change. So I can see both sides of what you're saying. And I really do want you to know that I really appreciate you, and I hear what you're saying. I really appreciate your comments.
Thank you. I just jump in, again, slideshows and writing things and presentations look great and the theory of it all, but those teachers and kids are the ones on the front lines, face to face, day in, day out. And it's really, really important to make sure you're truly, authentically getting the staff's perspective on these things. And I'm just implore you to do that.
And I also want to add that with that culture and climate are very much, it's been the subject of family meetings that I've been hosting is incredibly important to me. It is not in the space that I would say I want it to be, and those are things that I would say are part of the reason why I think there's also some value in reducing transitions and reducing the family sizes. So like I work in this building every day, and I too am on the front lines and running the halls and running the building and understanding what's going on here. And I have the bird's eye operatic view of what that looks like along with Mr. Williams. And I can tell you that our students coming back from this pandemic have a hard time transitioning. They have a hard time with managing multiple relationships with people. And so I understand, like, yes, is there a risk with making a big change after all we've been through? Yes. Is there a risk in remaining the same? I would say yes too. And so I strongly also am in a space where I'm looking at what's happening in our building. And I know that if I could keep kids in a space where they felt safer, that would make a difference for them too. So I want you to also I just want to put out there that my intent and work on this isn't about theory. My work and intent on this is not about alignment with any other district. My intent and work around this is because I see how kids are struggling every single day. I look at our data and I see how kids are shortchanged in terms of the minutes they get. And I look at the gaps in our achievement between our students who are Black and white, and those are things that need to change. And I am here to do change work for those aims because I care about the work that I do deeply. And so it is not about me padding my resume or trying to do something fancy with a PowerPoint. And I just want to be incredibly clear about that because I couldn't be more passionate about what I do with kids every day. And I want your children to be serviced well. I want them to have opportunities to be in all of the allied arts and grow. I know for a fact in my conversations with Nicolay that our students go there and they excel in their levels of involvement. And I know it's because they have a strong foundation in navigating different personalities and people that equip them with something incredibly special. And that is what we do well here. And we will continue to do that well. But we will also continue to wrap our students in solid academic foundation and support.
And I just want to say, I do appreciate your presentation. This is the first time I kind of understood exactly what's going on. I'm not a teacher. My kid is long gone from Glen Hills, but at least I understand. And let's just make this clear. I live right down the street from Glen Hills sometimes, and I have seen Dr. Smith's car out there on Saturday and Sunday. I've seen Anna's car out there on Saturday and Sunday. So I really know you guys are working very hard to try to do, and I'm like, go home, but you're doing your jobs. So it's this, that was, I don't think any of these comments are saying that you're not dedicated. Just parents want to know, we just gotta have to ask the tough questions. If we ask the tough questions, then at the end of the day, they can be Okay, I understand. I get the point, and that's all they're trying to do. It's what's best for the children.
I completely understand that. It's just, you know, again, we have to be able to put all of those areas out there and understand where the ask is coming from. And I think it's important to make sure that that's clear too.
Okay, thank you. I think Estrita's up next.
I can't hear you.
I can't hear her, Ben. I just want to.
It's all right.
Um,
Kind of sounds, yeah, okay.
It sounds like a Mickey Mouse
Like,
type
yeah.
of.
Sorry, yep, sounds like Mickey Mouse.
Like she took a helium balloon and started talking.
I wonder if she's gonna go out and come back in. Did she
I
go?
think she probably will.
Yeah. There she is.
It-
Is she
Can I try
back?
again?
Yeah, oh,
or
there
go
you
to-
go.
Oh, there you go.
It's when I listen too long and don't say anything that it gets finicky. Okay, Estrita Coger, 7007 North Braeburn Lane. Thank you for the presentation to kind of add on to what we heard at the board meeting a couple months ago. I also echo Carrie's concerns about such a dramatic change and recognizing that there are many ways to address the challenges that Anna just mentioned about kids struggling and achievement gaps. There are ways other than changing the whole schedule to address some of that. And so I would just like to have that noted that this is one strategy, but there are other ones that I may not be as disruptive to the whole school community. Next year, I worry about the implementation of this in less than 6 months with such a dramatic change for teachers without any time for, or very little time for planning. I understand, I was kind of confused about the summer planning option, which seems pretty integral to making this successful. And yet teachers would need to give up time in the summer to do that. I understand they could get paid, but that is not the same as making sure that everybody can be involved in such a big transition. So that was my concern about the other options being possible for improving climate and relationships and behavior. My second main concern is that social emotional learning came out as a top concern for parents in the ESSER survey, and yet I didn't see a concrete plan for how that will be introduced and integrated aside from one additional school counselor. Anybody have a response?
I think I would say that the structures that are there in place are really making sure that our student services team, as well as those other teachers, are forming a team to work through the structures and how they will be implemented. And you have more adults to help support the work around some of the key strategies of doing kind of monitoring students and determining the needs that are there. I also would say that, like, within the development of those lessons, there would be, so the work that our counselors do around academic career planning, the work that our counselors do around the second step curriculum could all be things that they work in tandem with that group and help to develop those lessons and do the training work around that with teachers to help them implement in classrooms. So I do think, like, to your end, that is also very much collaborative work that needs to be done, but you are at least you're providing the time and the workforce within that time frame to get the work done. So it would be really about taking a look at what are needs, how are we assessing needs, and how do we move forward with making sure that we're filling those pieces. I also indicated that we looked at, I've recommended that the add of another counselor, because right now we're a one counselor school to a school of 500 kids, and that ratio is incredibly high. And so being able to have counselors that may be focused within certain grade levels, or counselors that focus on different aspects of the role of counselor to help be more strategic in that work would be an incredibly important part of getting at a comprehensive SEL framework. But as with anything that we do, I do believe that, like, work that I've done in other schools, it requires a team of people to work. It requires them to do that planning work. So for me to speak about specific concrete plan without having those people at the table is something that I think is not an appropriate way. What I'm trying to do as a principal is create the pathway and the infrastructure to have people collaborate to get at that work, if that makes sense.
I mean,
But what, oh, sorry.
Oh, no, you can go. I was just going to ask a question,
But supposedly SEL staff and student support staff have been part of these meetings. So what do they envision as a good future in terms of integration and support for students?
When they have been a part of that, they have not commented on that. It's been more the idea that we need that time for morning meeting, and the idea that they are not teaching so that they can be able to push back into classrooms to do delivery of counseling lessons. And so that would be part of the recommendation to move away from where we're currently at in the delivery model.
So is it possible that they do this social emotional learning, or like counselors go into the classroom during some of the resources?
I would say that the counselors would end up pushing in during ELA or math time, and on an operated schedule. So it probably, or during social studies or science time, because that would give them an ultimate time to have the classroom teacher in there to help support the work, to learn about the work that's being done in there. And then that work, so in the way that it has been implemented before is counselor has gone into the classroom, taught a counseling lesson for part or whole of a period, and then goes back on a rotational basis to revisit those concepts and ideas. So we would be moving back to more of a model that looks like that, because what that allows then is our counselor, from what I'm hearing from that end, is the ability to be more responsive to student needs when they arise. So when we have students who are experiencing dysregulation or crisis or need that support, or we have kids that need mediation, that we would be able to then not have that person tethered to a specific space and time and schedule, so that they could have that flexibility to help respond and to be there to help support kids, to help pull kids in small groups. And work on social skills with them and identify. So part of the work of that infrastructure with those teachers would be saying, like, okay, here are our students who are struggling with certain things. How do we make plans to address those needs in a proactive way? And then you have an additional group of people who can help support that.
Okay, so the plan is to implement social emotional learning during either ELA or math for an extended period of time on a rotating schedule.
That's part of the plan, but I think you implement social emotional learning throughout the entire day.
Yeah.
It just
Yeah.
can't be something separate. You know, just talking about what the previous parent talked about as far as culture and climate, that's such a huge part of building culture and climate. So what this schedule does is it does free up our SST team to be able to even work with teachers to help support them in the strategies, so that everybody in the building is consistent with implementing strategies,
right,
to support social emotional.
Okay, so what do those strategies look like?
We'll work with the team to determine that. It's based on
right.
student needs.
So I would say that the state of Wisconsin has social emotional competencies.
It's like
for grade.
standards. Mhm.
So standard. So part of the planning template that I talked about earlier is really helping staff be aware of what those competencies look like and how they can help build a focus in on those on their lessons. So the work that would be done in the sense of the SST team would be, how do we start to forefront and teach about those competencies within classes? How do we send home letters to families? And that was part of what I put in there to say, like, we are focusing on this particular skill. And then how do we wrap that in our instructional practices? So, you know, if I'm a teacher of ELA and I'm in a space where I'm saying, okay, I'm starting my lesson, but I know my morning meeting was focused on self-advocacy, I might say, like, okay, we're going to enter into our independent work time. So like, as you're working and you're working through your work, I want people to think about how can you advocate for yourself with others or with me as the teacher to help advocate for what you need, and working to practice some of those skills, that reflection at the end of the period. SEL can't happen in an isolated space because it's not going to make the impact. It requires everyone to do that work. So going back to that implementation slide, I talked about the time for all teachers and the SST staff to be able to be together so that they can work on the development of those skills. The more adults, every adult in this building is a leader. So the more adult leaders that we have around being able to carry out this work, the stronger we're going to be for our scholars here to help support them.
Anna, there is a SEL curriculum, if I'm not mistaken. Is that
Yep,
correct?
Yes.
So-
Second step.
So, and this is where I learned this stuff yesterday.
Mhm.
So this curriculum can be sent to all teachers
Yep,
and implemented by all teachers. Right now, we're not doing that, but as we have a math curriculum, a language arts, whatever, ELS curriculum, we have a SEL curriculum, and we are supposed to be implementing that across the board.
Yep.
Correct.
Right.
And will we be doing that next year with this curriculum?
So
Are we
if you-
changing the curriculum from
I
what
would
we're
say,
doing now?
right, I would say that when we look at the second step curriculum, there's a couple components of that curriculum. It's usually about a 20-minute lesson that is like a quick focus on skills, right? That's typically how the lesson design is. So the fact that you could have a counselor dip in and do some work around that, and we could look at the trajectory of learning and pull out lessons from that curriculum that match what we're identifying as, you know, what we're seeing, where we think we need to focus for kids, as well as looking at information that we have around student data. And so those lessons could then be implemented, and the focus of those lessons could then be pushed out to staff who aren't maybe having the counselor in, who are witnessing the lesson, to help them understand what those focuses are. Does that make sense? So you've got like that 20-minute lesson, it's focused around this most social emotional learning skill. Then how do you build in these other frameworks? I would, you know, so that would be how we would move through getting that second step curriculum done. It's how we would also move through the academic and career planning work that needs to be done as well.
Thank you.
I just have one more question. I may be missing something, but it seems like there is just one less transition in next year's schedule, in that science and social studies are every other day rather than every day, because I still counted 7 transitions in the 6th through 8th grade schedule between every block that you mapped out. So I'm just confused as to how there are fewer transitions if it's only just one class less every day.
Yeah, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, you're muted.
Thank you, sorry. The transition times in the 4 or 5 units, they would not be transitioning, like, so you know how our building is configured, they wouldn't be transitioning out. Does that make sense? So
Well, I'm thinking about the 6th through 8th graders. I understand. I mean, I still counted. Am I wrong that there's not, am I missing something? Because they're still moving throughout the day to 8 different places.
I mean, that's something we could circle back on and take a look at with you.
No, but wait a minute. Is
No,
that,
that's fine. I can answer it. I can answer it. Let me just pull up the schedule and take a look at it. So you're looking at the changes. So You would only know because they stay in the same class. So you have that block of math, you would have one transition after math, right?
Well,
You
from
would have
morning meeting to resource, and then from resource to ELA, and then from ELA to math, and then from math to music, and then from music to lunch and recess, and then to art, tech, STEAM, or PE, and then to science and social studies. So I don't see how that seems as many transition. You're only cutting out one transition from their current schedule.
Right, but when you look at the configuration of the houses and the way that the classrooms are set up, those transitions between the academic areas are not going to be the same kind of transitions that we're having right now. So if you look at the way that they're configured in the houses, right now, every time the bell rings, every kid comes out of every class and is moving. You would have the ability to move in between classes without having to enter out. You could just move in between like they do like right now that's happening in 4th and 5th grade. So you don't have the movement out into all of the spaces. So there's not as much I guess, I don't know, like if you look at the way our classrooms are structured, you would not have that kind of movement. The only place you would have that kind of movement is up in 8th grade. And even then it would be a tighter movement. It wouldn't be as far. So those transition times could be cut down, and the amount of a passage in the hallways where we're starting to see, like where you see some of the behaviors that are under teacher radar, that kind of stuff would be tightened up in that, just because of the way they would move in the building.
And you can't adjust that with the current schedule?
No, because you have a 5-person team and you have 5 different classrooms. So if I'm moving every day, every period, all those kids come out of all of those classrooms, and then they have to move back into all the other classrooms. And even though they're right next door to each other, in many ways, it's not a far travel, but what ends up happening is you get kids that come out, you've got a pool of kids in the hallway where if you look at the way those transitions work in 4th and 5th grade, they keep them within the houses. And so there's not all of that movement that's happening. A lot of it is just the way the building is configured that creates that. So yes, you would have the transition to move, but you wouldn't be moving as much throughout the building.
Okay, that's helpful.
I would also offer that transitions wasn't the main goal or focus of the work. Like when you mapped out priorities, transitions was just having those tighter transition was an incidental benefit. It wasn't the main, goal.
Well, so the first thing that Anna said when she said I do the work that she does is that she's seeing kids struggling. She's seeing them struggle during transition. So
that would be one of them. Yeah.
So I appreciate the clarification because it's not, but I also wonder whether there aren't ways to help address those problems that are occurring at that time, aside from redoing the whole schedule.
And I would say that, some of the other things that we need is we need increased supervision, right? We need increased supervision during those transitions, right? And a lot of that too is it is the way that things are configured. So like if I look at the configuration between how kids move in this building, there's not a clear way for teachers to be either in the hallway or at their threshold. So typically the way that we supervise transitions is you're in your threshold. The issue in our building is you have the threshold there, but then you have the threshold behind and you have thresholds over the place. So there's lots of opportunities for the way that kids are moving in patterns right now to create that. So like, I can just say to you, like from my principal lens, like looking at the whole building is much the way I would look at my classroom. Like, where do you reduce those points? And so you're trying to kind of build the structure in place so that you don't have that. And again, back to Mrs. White's point, like I want our curriculum to be able to be implemented with fidelity. That's really the primary goal of this. But when I do think about that transitional piece, because that's where your questioning is, those are some of the barriers that we're up against in terms of just building design and how we can move through that. So if I have a teacher in the threshold, they have 3 other doors or 4 other doors behind them that they're also trying to watch, and kids are moving in and out. And so if you have a house or team, you have a tighter framework by reconfiguring the schedule, you have a tighter framework where kids are moving in between 2 teachers rather than be moving between 5. Or moving between 3 teachers rather than moving between 5. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
And I would just circle back, Estrida, and say, so I hear your question around, is there another way we can support transitions besides changing the schedule? But the schedule isn't, the recommendation to change the schedule isn't to address transitions. It's ultimately to address, what we saw in the ESSER survey around kids wanting help, parents wanting us to support in reading and math and social emotional. So those would be the goals. We obviously wouldn't change the whole schedule just to address transitions if that was the only concern we were having.
I know. And so I think part of what has been missing is this clear rationale of why this is being done. And Anna, you provided some background as to what led to this conversation, but perhaps if the community had a clear rationale as to why these decisions are being made, that would help us understand what is being prioritized and why.
Sure. And I think we could probably share the slideshow, because I think that Anna did a great job walking through what some of that rationale was. We could share that with the community at large.
Right, but the slideshow didn't include the rationale for why this change is taking place. It's proposed.
I thought it did.
Well, the rationale that I proposed in the initial piece, but you're right, and I can certainly add that rationale in and create a communication or FAQ regarding that, if that would be something that would be helpful to our families to try to understand that better.
Sure.
Because
because in our exchange, you were helpful in clarifying some of that, but I think the broader community needs to know what the reasons are.
Right. Sure. So like, for example, just for example, I will say that there is not a ton of conclusive research around the fact that a block schedule makes a difference in achievement, right? That's up in the air. There's varied results from that. But what I do know is that when we're looking at the fidelity of the curriculum in which we implement in terms of minutes and how it's implemented, if we can get better at that work, we should see an increase in achievement, because there are studies that show that that does benefit all learners. And right now, we're missing the mark with the amount of minutes that we have. And I'm going to say, as somebody with a very strong literacy background, the lack of literacy minutes in 4th and 5th grade is also something that if the board says no, like that has to be rectified, because we're not meeting the mark. We're 50 minutes. We're trying to teach a readers and writers workshop in 50 minutes. It is not adequate time to do the work that needs to happen. And to Ben's point, I don't think we're doing justice to mathematics either.
I remember, and this is, as I'm old, this has been going on for years, getting ready to try to get into this block. I think the conversation started even before the pandemic, and then we just kind of, let it go because the pandemic was here. But I even want to say that it went back when Jeff Flagg was the principal, or it started close to before Nassif was the principal even. And as I recall, Mrs. Estrida, we did try, and this is just my recollection, we did some adjustments because we didn't want to make a huge, jump like this. And I think over the years, now we have to. I think our achievement gap is so huge right now. Before a few years ago, I want to say 4 or 5 years ago, we closed it every year, and we were I think Parkway was #1 and Glen Hills were #2 on closing the achievement gap every year, and the things that we were doing. Now I think it is twofold, that we need to get back to basics and actually doing some teaching that is right there. And Ben has taught me a lot about, instruction, that if you're face-to-face doing this, being in a classroom, consistently working and getting to know these kids instead of just the 50 minutes and boom. And I had to get it understood to myself, for me to understand it as well. But it's been going that route. So I don't want you to think that this is something that has has just came up, because literally this has been at least 4 years that I've been on the board, that this has come up. And then we've either pushed it back or said, well, let's just try to tweak it, or we need to change it. And, you know, I think Jenica has been here as long, and some of the other, Dr. Smith has been here. I think it even started a little bit when Dr. Smith was the principal at Glen Hills. So I think this transition has been trying to get done, but I think I want you to rest assured that at least me and the most of the board, and especially Andy, we've been here a little bit, we've seen this transition, but we've also seen where they tried to tweak it. And then we've rejected going to the full, you know, block schedule and tried to tweak it. And none of this has seemed to be working. So I don't necessarily know. I mean, I'm on this committee for exactly 1 day, but I'm glad I got an understanding of it. But I also am going back to thinking that this is something that has been trying to get done for years. And I think between all these years, they have touched on it.
Thank you for the opportunity to have a conversation.
Thank you, Serena.
Okay. So I do think though that there is, I think something was said about more math time doesn't increase outcomes, but I'm pretty sure there is evidence saying that if you spend more time doing math, then the outcomes do improve. But with ELA, I don't know if that's true, but I do know that there is at least some evidence that. Right. Okay.
I think, yeah, I think the evidence is around whether the block schedule is a game changer around closing opportunity gaps, I think was more where I was headed with that, Ben. But I agree. I mean, yeah. Any work around practice or expertise would indicate that time on something that makes a difference.
Yeah. So I guess, yeah, the variable is time for me and for you is block. So, right. It's different.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's time. Yeah.
Or is Ben being biased because he's a math teacher? Just kidding.
No, I've read stuff about this. More time. Yeah. Anyway. All right. I think Jenny's next.
Hi, my name is Jenny Doss, and I live at 6605 North Braeburn Lane. And I really appreciate your slideshow and your passion. I definitely can appreciate that we want to make sure that we're teaching to fidelity as a teacher. My concern, I also appreciate that we want to make sure that we have eyes on students in the hallway, because I can appreciate that there's behavior happening in the hallway. Part of my concern is behavior that's happening in the classroom and students that are having a challenge with the amount of time that they're in the classroom now and increasing the amount of time that we're asking them to stay in a class. I know that we're hoping that they're going to have, more relationship building with teachers. But I'm concerned that we're asking younger students who might not be developmentally ready to spend such long periods of time doing such long amounts of holding still. And so that is my concern.
Thank you.
Anna, I can take that if you want. Just coming from, I can speak coming from an elementary lens. That's kind of my forte. I will say our elementary students, kindergarten through 5th grade, do sustain those blocks of time within the classroom. And then we also utilize that. Nicolay utilizes the block schedule as well at the high school. So I do think there's some real good opportunities for us to kind of lengthen that time a little bit. I get a lot of feedback from teachers saying that they're having a hard time getting through all the curriculum. So I think if we had some opportunities to kind of slow things down and start building some of those relationships, I think it would be really important. And they should be coming from a background in 4th and 5th grade, moving to 6th grade, sustaining that academic block. So they're currently doing a lot of that work right now to continue it on through. So for that piece of it,
I'm not worried about high school students. I think block scheduling in high school is right on. I'm worried about specifically 4th and 5th graders. But even 6th, 7th, and 8th graders who are struggling now with an hour
Mhm.
to go on longer. I think that is a lot to ask them. Do I think that it's great instructionally? Yeah, I do. As a teacher, I think it's great instructionally, but for a good number of students, I think it's a big ask, and I don't know if that's something that.
Yep, I agree. And I do think that proactive planning that Anna talked about earlier, how can we proactively do some planning around that? And then, all the engagement pieces, how are we being active and providing some active times during that larger block, I think would be really important, because all kids, all kids are so very different. So every child's going to need something a little different within the classroom. And if we're working together as a team to do some of that co-plan, co-serve, I think that is going to be really helpful for students. And it's going to take us a little while to, I'm sure, to figure it out and make sure that we're engaging all kids.
Well, that's something else that I find concerning, where we're already short on staff and teacher planning time, and then rolling this out very quickly. I have a lot of reservations on how it will impact some students who are, I know that the thoughts are to help students that are at very much risk, and I just would like to say that I am concerned for students who are very much at risk.
Yeah,
I'll stop talking now.
No, I hear what you're saying, and that's something we'll definitely have to look into.
And I was
Thanks,
just going to say, sorry, I was going to say, I'm sure that your concern is not different from other families. I have 4 kids, right? And I think about the extended time. So circling back a little bit to what Astrida said, that could be really helpful in communication, to take where you actually broke that out, Anna, in your slide, to show what a block would look like with the different areas where there's much like a mini lesson and breakouts, and just to alleviate some of that. I think that would be a crucial part of our communication to families, is to show how it would look, and that it's not sitting for that length of time.
No, I understand the concept behind it.
Yeah.
I'm a teacher. I get the concept behind it. I just don't in practice how it's going to actually work, especially for struggling students, especially for students who are not reading on grade level, or students who are, having a hard time being in the classroom as is, and students who are having a hard time regulating their bodies, and all of those struggles, and then now do it for a block schedule. And then you're also on top of that not getting as much movement in your day as you were getting before. That's a lot. But I promise stop talking now. I'll turn myself off.
You're good.
Thank you, Jenny. I appreciate you bringing those concerns forward and appreciate your perspective on that.
Yep.
Okay, so I think Carla's next.
Hi, everyone. At some point, I may put on glasses over my glasses to read my notes, and I apologize, but I have an eye infection and a cold, and so I'm kind of foggy, but I had a few questions that I just wanted to ask to help wrap my head around this, but I really wanted to echo what Jenny Doss said. Oh, I'm sorry, Carla Pennington Cross, 909 West Acacia Road, Glendale, Wisconsin. The first thing I thought when I heard about these really long blocks was about kids with developmental challenges, developmental disabilities. It might make it hard to sit in one space for a really long time on one subject. And without a really strong plan around that, I think it's a recipe for failure for struggling kids, and for the teachers, equally importantly, for the teachers who are going to be working with those kids. And I would anticipate some significant behavior challenges in an 80-minute class, followed by another 80-minute class both of which follow a 20-minute resource. I mean, you're talking about, like, I was looking at, it's like 180 consecutive minutes of intervention, ELA and math. It's just a huge ask for some kids. So without really careful planning around behavior and SEL, not something that's going to happen in real time, but careful planning about how you're going to manage that. I just don't know how it's going to work for both your teachers and your students.
So I just
want to express that concern. I've already
Yeah.
heard that you don't have that plan in place yet. So I want to just urge you to put that plan in place, not in real time, but ahead of time. If this block schedule happens the way it's set up, I just think you need to put that plan in place ASAP and start staffing it up. Because what I understand to be the motivation for this is that you're kind of scrunching everything to make room to stretch ELA and math, right? Stretch ELA and math, scrunch everything else. And then I had the same question as Astrida, where does SEL fit into that? So what I'm hearing you say is, in that expanded math and ELA time, somewhere in there, you're going to put in some SEL learning. We don't know what it's going to look like yet or how much, but that's the general plan, right? I have that right?
I would actually say that there would be time for there to be some specific lessons from counselors, but that social emotional learning would be not just stretched in those areas, but would be embedded throughout by helping to build the capacity of teachers to do that throughout the school day with students, so that there's some aligned focus around that, so that every teacher is speaking the same language around SEL, so that we are aligned as a group of adults. And so I don't see that just being plopped in and plopped out.
I mean, but part of it is about actual lessons, right? There's some actual lessons that are part of that second step, and with the implementation of SEL curriculum.
Right.
That's what I'm saying. What I heard you say is that portion of it would be slotted into math and ELA time, right?
It could be slotted into math and ELA. It could be looked at a rotational. So like I can tell you in years past, as Mia has gone into classrooms to do that work and to teach those lessons, what it might look like is she may go on a rotational schedule. Like on Monday, she is in 4th grade, she dips into an ELA class. On Tuesday, she goes to 5th grade, she dips into a math class, right? So it could look like it could fit in all of those places. We really just try to look at where are those courses where we have all children present. So like, for example, trying to do it on the 8AB days would be confusing to dip it into those areas, because we struggle there, because you might double up on some kids and miss some kids based on the way the schedule runs. So it would be about planning that schedule out so that those consistent times would rotate, so you're not stealing minutes away from just math or just ELA, right? And so that you're kind of you're building that time in. But I think the bigger piece of this is the lessons right now are being taught in isolation, and they're being taught, but what I'm hearing from staff when I'm working with them in team meetings is, like, we need to understand more about what we should be teaching around this area. So like building the capacity of the adults here, to me, is the approach that's going to leverage the concern. So I guess that's kind of the way that I see this, the way I've implemented it in other districts, is that is what it looks like. It looks like you have a focus for the week. You are looking at those concepts and those skills. You are helping kids reflect on their success around those things, and that it's constant throughout their school day. Because
so I understand the model. I'm talking about the when, right? Like, where do you fit that in? And I'm just, my point is simply, what I must be wrong in what I thought I heard you say, but it sounds like you don't know when it would slot in those learning moments, right? That's still in the works.
So when you look at the second step curriculum, there's a trajectory of lessons, right? We would look at those lessons and say, how many lessons need to be taught so that we can teach the second step curriculum, right?
Right.
And
that hasn't been done yet, though, is my point, right?
You're right.
That's still in progress.
Right.
Okay.
So right
But
now,
I appreciate you pivoting on how SEL worked this year and seeing that it's not working. And with pullouts and teachers not observing that teaching around SEL. As you know, that was something that's really concerned me this year. So I'm really grateful
Yeah.
that you all see what you're describing now, that has to be integrated into classrooms so that teachers can see what that's
Mhm.
about. So
Right.
I would urge you to think about upfront where that's going to fit, because if you want to grow culture, if you want to grow, improve behavior, those kinds of things, I don't think it's going to work if you wait until, September to say, where are we going to fit this in? That's just going to create a rustle.
I have no intention of proceeding that way. So I
The
guess
other
that's all I can tell you is that that work can't happen in September, or it's not going to happen. And
Yeah,
we
exactly.
have way too much information about the work that needs to be done and the lessons that need to be taught to be in a space. Like, we have this whole remaining part of the school year. We do have time over the summer. Our student services team has additional days in the summer that they're on contract. So like, absolutely no, it wouldn't just be well, here we're going to hit September and hope this comes together. Like that would not be the way that we would plan that.
The other thing I noticed, I was actually, I'm trying to wrap my hand around it. It sounds like you're planning to use, I'm looking at my notes, Allied Arts, PE, World Language, and Music teachers to provide SST support?
So those teachers would work with the team. So right now, as I mentioned before, it is common practice for us in the school to look at who are kids who are struggling academically, who are kids who are rising to the top that need support in classroom based on some of the things that Jenny Doss talked about, like who's having problems with self-regulation, who are kids that need breaks, right? If I can look at bringing more adults to the fold to do those moments of checking in with kids, to make sure that they're following up with them so that they have a trusted adult to go to in the building, that they can go to a classroom and say, hey, like, there's Jenica, we know that she struggles with this block. So I'm going to be the teacher that goes there and takes her for a quick movement break. That I have more adults. So yes, they would support that work in that way, and work in coordination.
I mean, I know, like, I mean, I've always perceived, I know either the 5th grade or 6th grade team used to do this, right? To make sure that each student had someone on the team who could be their go-to. But here, this was very specific, that it's the Allied Arts, PE, World Language, and Music teachers who will take on specific additional duties around SST. It different from other teachers, right?
The reason why I'm saying that we would have these people help do some of that coaching and some of the monitoring of data is because they have an additional prep time that is not filled. So their teaching load does not match the teaching load of some of the other teachers. So they have a period where they can actually focus on that work and plan with the SST team. That's why. Because right.
So my question around that is, to me, that seems like a significant additional responsibility. Are they getting extra training to support them on that? How are they going to do that? Like, what's to make them capable with the background and training they need to be stepping into those SST functions?
They wouldn't be functioning as SST members. They would be functioning as coaches to help support kids. So right now, Mr. Williams, myself, Mr. Conrath, Ms. Krager, you have all teachers all over the building in our work with kids who take on kids as like I'm your go-to person and I help support you. Like, we are all leaders of that work in this building. And so that kind of work of checking in with the kid every morning to say, hey, what's your goal? I want to see you work on this today. And like, you're going to get feedback from all of your teachers and you're going to check in with me at the end of the day so that I can like give you a high five, a fist bump, and send an awesome report home to your parents. That's the work that's being done. And so that doesn't require, like, I don't, having our SST team take all of those kids on is a drain on their need to help respond to other things that are happening in the building. So that would be the support of that group.
But you identified this specific group. So you're just saying they're going to have to do a little more because they've got an extra 40 minutes in the day than other teachers. Okay.
Because their planning and teaching load is not the same as other teachers. So if we're looking at creating an equitable load of responsibility, and so like there's teacher prep time, so everyone is guaranteed their prep and lunchtime. The rest of the day is their teaching time. And so when there are periods in which they're not, like, so for example, right now, all of our world language teachers are teaching 5 classes a day. Next year, if we move to this schedule, they'll teach 3 classes a day. So there's 2 additional periods. Does that make sense?
Won't they still have the same number of students?
No,
They'll have fewer
because of the way the schedule is configured, they'll teach across 6, 7, and 8. So they'll only see one group in 6, 7, and 8, right? So you're only seeing one group in 6, 7, and 8. And so because of that, you have 2 additional periods of the day in which you can help support other learning in our building and other supports for our students.
Won't they
And
still
then
have
you
the
still
same
get your
total
2
number of
preps.
students?
And you still get your lunch.
I'm missing something. Won't they still have the same total number of students? If there's 80 students taking world language, won't they still have 80 students total? Or will there be actually fewer students taking world language?
There will not be fewer students taking world language. Rather than teaching 5 classes, they would teach 3.
But they'll still have the same total number of students, right? Or are you saying there's an additional world language teacher? Or are you saying there's fewer number of students per day?
You would see the students during the day. It's the way that they're configured based on the numbers at the different grade levels and the way that that shakes out. It would not be, because you're not teaching as many classes.
Am I missing something? I feel like I'm confused because if there's let's say there's 80 world language students and you have 2 teachers, they're each teaching 40 students, right? So how is having a fewer number of classes reducing their teaching number of students?
It reduces the amount of grading that they would have because the number of classes isn't there.
Oh, because they're just teaching fewer times a year?
No, because
a week? I don't. What am I missing?
It sounds like we might just have to like take this
You'll
off.
have to walk me through this.
Yeah.
I can walk you through and show you how it lays out in this.
I'll tell you what I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about community reaction. I mean, here's what I hear. You're going to reduce the amount of teaching in language or allied arts and put them on lunch duty. That's how people are going to see this. And you're going to reduce the amount of PE and put PE teachers on SST. That's the impression your slideshow creates right now to me. And so that's why I'm asking these questions. I maybe take a look at it because I formed this impression that, oh, all our allied art style teachers are going to be teaching a little less in class and doing more student support services. That was the impression I formed because their number of minutes of instruction is going down. So you got to fill that time with something else. You're asking them to take on other duties, lunch or student support, right? That's what it looks like. And if that's not what you're doing, then I think you should try to clarify that. But I mean, on its face, that's what it looks like. Less time in class with students for our allied art teachers, and you're filling that time they're no longer direct teaching with something else, right? So
I think this seems like something that Anna could look at, and we could, maybe take this one offline. And then, when it comes to the full board, we can, maybe it'll be more clear. There'll be more clarity with it.
I just want you to think about it, Anna, because if I'm asking it, I'm never alone,
I hear that.
And
I hear that.
And offer
we
more
can do it.
clarity around that.
Yeah.
I'd be happy to talk with you in other spaces about it as well. Just give me a second here because I can barely see. If I'm not making a sense, just a little bit of whining here then, and then I'll be quiet. More math instruction probably does lead to better achievement. More music instruction definitely leads to better academic achievement. So for what it's worth, I'm going to keep pushing on this. Music is not secondary and just for fun. Music education in huge longitudinal studies is associated very closely with growth in academic success. So I think it was Carrie who mentioned, just sadness over kind of the shrinking of our music programs. It's not just about the music, it's also about academic success. So I just want to say that at every chance. So sorry to take up so much time trying to wrap my head around this stuff.
All right. Thank you.
Ben, I just have one clarifying thing. I just want to understand. So is this a recommendation that is going to the board, or is this a discussion item?
This will be going to the board as a recommendation.
If we decide it goes as a recommendation, we have to vote on that. Okay, because this is one of the things that I want to say. These are, and I say this for everything that comes through the board, that these are things that they are suggesting, staff is suggesting, and administrative is suggesting. If we don't say they can do it, some of these plans aren't going to be put in place, because if they spend hours and hours and hours working on every single plan exactly to how it's going to work, and we say no, then they have wasted valuable time doing work that is never going to come to fruition. So I think when we look at what our recommendations are, we can ask, we can say, this is the recommendation. And then later, when we pass this, we can say, but we want, when this is ready to be implemented, I want you to come back with a full implementation of what we're doing. Therefore, we can tweak what we need and tweak what we have to get, or some of these I think this micro questions that we have, then we can get to the root of them. But right now, this is a micro kind of plan. And I don't know if somebody just left, but this is a micro kind of plan, and we haven't figured all that out yet. And it will come. So I would probably recommend that once we send this to the board, if we pass it, I'll say, and once everything is worked out, can you come back before school starts or before you implement this and tell us exactly how this is going to work? And then we can nitpick it a little bit more then, because right now we don't know.
Yeah, one thing is
So
that,
what?
oh, so on board docs, this is listed as a discussion.
For tonight, yes. We would like to bring it to the full board.
But it should have been listed on board docs as a discussion, possible motion or possible action if we were supposed to action this and put it to the full board.
Okay, then that's a change, because we haven't been doing that in committee. We've just been saying, yes, bring it to the full board. And I don't know if we've done it formally, so we'll make sure we change that moving forward so that it's formal.
Okay, I just know, all right.
Yeah, we'll
So
fix that.
if that's not the way it's, I don't know how this works, but Ben, you're the chair, so you decide.
Well, I think you guys brought it to the board without a motion from the curriculum committee last time anyway.
It was as a discussion item, right? So we came to the board as a discussion, and then you guys asked it to come back to curriculum for a
Okay.
deeper, and then we wanted to bring it back to the full
So
board action. Yeah.
I guess, are we allowed to do an action on this without it being listed as an action?
Or do we just ask the board president to add it to the agenda for the 20th?
I think that
When we
would,
set the agenda?
Tamika, what do you think?
Okay, this is what I think. We had a discussion item.
Yeah.
We are not, according to our agenda, we are not able to do an action item, but the president can put it on the agenda without a recommendation from the
Right.
committee,
So it would
Okay.
just come to the full board. Yep.
right? But it is no recommendation from the committee.
Okay.
Thanks, Tamika. All right, well, I guess we should move on to a visitor participation now on any non-agenda item.
I thought that's what we just did.
No.
Sorry. I'm sorry. Okay.
Okay. So is there a motion to adjourn?
They said, I think the power went out
It
for
did.
multiple people.
Yep. That's
All
why
right,
we
I was just
lost
wondering.
Jenica. We lost Jenica and Anna because they're at school and the power went out.
And I was
Um,
like, where is all these, my computer like literally was bright and all of a sudden all these people left and I'm like, oh,
Yeah, there are storms. I'll have to
Well,
look at-
good thing we are not running this, you were not at, or we would all be out. Motion to adjourn, Chair Ben.
Yeah, is
Win,
there,
Ben, win,
is
Ben,
there, is
win.
there a motion?
I have a
Oh.
motion to adjourn, Ben,
I
win, Ben,
second
win.
that, yes. All right, all in favor?
Ben, win, Ben, win, Ben, win.
Meeting's adjourned.
Thanks. They lost
Hi, guys.
Wi-Fi over at
Goodbye.
Glen Hills. The power went
yeah.
out with the storm.
They
So thank
actually,
you.
There's
Estrida
a
said that
storm, there's no
Carla
storm.
lost
I'm,
power too.
so there's no storm right now. It's not even raining outside.
Well, it
Where I
was
am.
earlier, and I know that I just talked to
Bye, Ben.
Jenica, and she said the Wi-Fi is down at Glen Hills, so
Okay.
they weren't able to connect back on.
Well, I'm gonna make sure that Lindsay puts on her B&G hat and takes care of this.
Dude, we should start playing Bob the Builder again. I'm telling you. See you later.
All right, goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.